I'm Gary Striegler, and welcome to this presentation of the virtual trade show on mantel construction and design. Now, before I get started, I want to say thank you to the good people at Windsor who provided me with all the material that I used building these mantels, but also gave us some financial support to make it possible. Windsor is a great company. They have great products, but also they believe in support education, which I think is so important today. One of the things I love about their products is it all comes in long lengths. It's all incredibly stable. Like all the boards that I used, all the flat boards that I used were just exactly the right thickness. They have straight, crisp, clean edges, and they lay flat, which is so important when you're building a piece of millwork like a mantel. And of course, they also come primed. There's never any chatter on any of their moldings. So it's really a great company. So thank you, Windsor for working with me on this project. Now, I'm going to try and spend a good bit of time talking about design. Although most of us, when someone comes to us wants to build a mantel, they're coming with an inspiration picture in their hand. Now, that can be a good thing and a bad thing, because that inspiration picture may have been, the mantel in that inspiration picture may have been built back before there were even building codes. I remember seeing some pictures and pictures of old houses where there's this beautiful mantel and all this is just kind of charred, maybe not burned, but you can tell it's gotten real hot and the paint's kind of gotten black. And that's because it was, there wasn't much clearance between the opening in the firebox and where the mantel was. Probably the first thing that you really need to establish when you get ready to start designing a mantel is what type of fireplace you have. And today that could be anything from a true wood burning fireplace to a dedicated gas burner to a wood fireplace with a gas log in it. Any of the times that you've got anything that has gas, you're going to have either the gas log or the information that comes with the mantel is going to give you the information you need about what the projection can be. And it's going to have a graph like this, where it's going to say from the opening in the firebox, when you come up a certain distance, your mantel can project out so far. And on some of the really efficient, gas fireplaces that turn out a lot of heat, it can be a long distance. Like for this one, it was 16 inches from the opening before we could come out 7, I believe it was. So you have to really have this information. We're right now actually talking to one client about doing something on a fireplace, and she does not have, they bought the house, they don't have the existing information. So when something like that happens, unless you can find out the brand and all that, you really just have to go to the extreme to make sure that you're not opening yourself up to liability. Now, the other thing that I'm a pretty firm believer in is it's always a good idea, even if you think you know, to get a hold of your local code enforcement official, especially if it's wood burning, where there's not going to be that literature that says here's what it is. The other thing that you have to be concerned about is how much clearance to the side. Now, with the gas fireplaces, they really don't deal much with the side. Matter of fact, this piece of literature that I had I looked everywhere and it didn't give anything. So what I did is I actually, this projects out 2.5. So I went to the vertical information and I gave myself as much side clearance as if this had been the mantel shelf. So I was just trying to make sure that I was being really safe on that. It might be a good idea for me to go ahead and just give some kind of but some definitions of what I call the parts of a mantel, just so that we're all talking the same. The first thing is the pilaster. These vertical elements are the pilaster, and they could be, this is a panel pilaster. It could be turned around like a column. Sometimes you have ones, these are panel, but sometimes you have fluted or reeded pilasters. This is a mantel or a panel mold kind of pilaster. Generally speaking, these take a little less room up than the ones like this. In this instance, I put this crosseted corner on there, and so that actually takes up a little more room. But This could just come up and miter around, and then it would take a little less room than this. Now, one of the things about a panel pilaster like this, by changing out the moldings, you can, one, change the looks, but you can also, by going to smaller moldings, shrink this. If this had had a bigger molding in here, this might have had to grow by 2 or 3 inches. So some fireplaces, neither of these actually, but may have like a frieze or over the mantle detail that could have carvings on it. It could have some dental detail. It could have more panels. Those are nice looking fireplaces. The problem with that is the more you have going on here below the mantle shelf, it pushes the mantle shelf up. On both of these, I would just consider this the mantle shelf. Now, sometimes there's also an over mantle, which can be a panel detail or some different things, more pilasters, almost like a mantle sitting on top of a mantle. So that's kind of the definition. Now, one thing that just crossed into my mind I will make sure that I mention is if you're in a situation where it's going to be really, really critical what that side clearance is, you always have to remember you've got these moldings that wrap around this pilaster. So if you're going to be really technically correct, you have to have, if it's 60 inches here, you have to add the amount of those 2 pieces also. That's just one of those little things you want to make sure that you do remember. So when I start to design a mantle, of course, generally someone's coming to me with a picture of something they want, and the first thing I have to do is I have to look at that picture and I have to see what there is in the actual place that the fireplace is going to be built that's going to affect that design. For instance, if there's a couple windows there, then no matter what their design looks like, I've got to work within those windows unless they're windows. Cabinetry there can make a difference. Electrical plugs can make a difference, although generally speaking, you can do something to move those if you really want to. I also want to mention real quick, it's always a good idea to find out if the client wants a mantle plug, although, for lights or anything, kind of lamps or anything, although those are becoming less popular as we have more and more TVs going over the top of fireplaces. Now, one thing that I did not mention when I was talking about, we have combustible clearance here and on the sides. If it's a true wood burning fireplace, you also have to have non-combustible out in front called the hearth. And generally, and this is where I live, if I come out 2 feet in front, that'll easily pass code, and then a foot out to the side. But again, you want to make sure that you check with your building inspector. And actually, if you think about it, I would want my, whatever it was going to be, whether it be a flush hearth down flush with the floor or a raised hearth, you'd want it to be outside of this. So that's actually going to put you way beyond a foot to either side. But I think that 1 foot actually will pass code. Now, if I have a choice, I'm always going to tell people I would like to have a flush hearth, because one thing, it doesn't take take up space in the room, but also the lower the hearth is, that means the firebox is down lower, and that gives me more room to design. Generally speaking, for me, the mantle shelf is going to be anywhere from about maybe 58 inches if it's a really small room, up to about 68 or 70 if it's a really, really big room. Of course, again, that also is going to affect where that TV might be, or even there's going to be a picture above it. This is something that just crossed my mind, but I want to mention. If you happen to be able to get in there during the framing stage, it's also a good idea to put some extra blocking in there before drywall if you can, so that whether it be a TV or a picture or whatever's going up there, there's something to mount it. That really doesn't have anything to do at all with mantle construction, but at least that is, well, your clients will thank you if you can do that. So, kind of alluded to and talked a little bit about story pole a couple of different times, and I always, once I've kind of found out from the client whether there's going to be a TV or not, I've got the inspiration picture, I kind of know what the non-combustible has to be, then I'll start out with a story pole. Now, one other thing that really, locks you in on design is there's a big difference on this mantle if this is going to be tile here, or if it's going to be, say, in the other extreme, maybe native stone, which I always think native stone is a bad idea because you don't have much of a area here to develop a pattern. So I'm a big fan of tile or brick. But if it's going to be tile or brick, then you probably only need about 3/4 of an inch. Excuse me, if it's going to be tile or maybe even the slab stone, you need about 3/4 of an inch in here. But if it's going to be brick, then everything's got to move forward some. Then again, I want to ask the client, well, how much of a mantle shelf do you want? These both are about 7 inches, and that's a pretty good height. But some people, I've seen people that want even 12 inches. The thing that you have to remember as you're doing your design is, if this is projecting out 7 inches here, it's also going to project out to the side. In this instance, this probably projects out about from this space, which lines up with my pilaster. This projects out probably about 5.5 inches. So that means as I'm doing the horizontal layout, how much wall room do I need to build this mantle? Then I've got to allow not only the width of the pilaster here, but I've also got to allow for the amount this crown's going out to the outside. And again, it seems to me like the biggest challenge is almost always how much wall space do you have, because people just don't leave you as much room as you really want. If I get a chance, I tell people, hey, I'd like to have like about 8 foot on the wall. Now you seldom get this. I think both of these would take up around 7 foot, a little bit more than 7 foot. So for the horizontal layout, I start out in the very, very center will be the firebox, and then I mark, the width of the firebox, and I add the non-combustible, and then I see whatever my pilaster is going to be. If this happened to be like a fluted or reeded pilaster, it would probably take up a little less room. But anyway, you do that layout, and then I have to add how much the projection is there to the side for that crown, for the shelf. Then I would switch to do a vertical layout, and in this instance, with this panel pilaster, I have to mark, well, here's my base detail. Here's the rail that's going to start the panel detail. The panel detail, another rail, this little molding that goes around here, and then you start up with the mantle shelf. So all that information, I just mark off on the story pole. And if I had an upper mantle, an over mantle detail, I'd lay that out also, and it would have its own separate horizontal and vertical layout. One of the ways that you can affect how much this projects is by using different crown moldings. There are even a few that don't have crown moldings in there. And this is actually a cove mold, which is a very clean look, but it gives me a nice amount of projection. One of the things that I would always, as far as this is just a design element, always make sure that you have at least a 1 inch thick mantle shelf, and sometimes I'll make a mention out. This is 1 inch. I just took a piece of solid lumber and rounded it over, but you don't want to have that be 3/4. It just doesn't look substantial. Now sometimes I'll do 2 layers of 3/4 and take a molding and edge band around it to get a really big look. But again, all those things you just have to take into consideration. So how's my time coming?
14 minutes, 15 seconds.
Okay, thank you. I'll try and keep up because I have a 30-minute limit on time. So this is a little bit of a different detail with this molding that wraps around here. What I wanted to do is just show you kind of a schematic of how these things go together. So this is actually just a cross section of this detail. And a lot of things like this, I talk to people about, well, building a mantle can look complex, and this might or might not look complex to you. But what you have to do is you have to think about it as a series of small projects that you just kind of focus on one part, build that part, and then build the next part off of that. You do have to think about how all those parts come together, but generally speaking, if you can kind of break it down, it works better. Now, this is all built around this one really nice big molding, which is actually Windsor 1, I think, calls this a crown mold. But for me, I could tell it's going to have that really bold shadow line that I wanted going around there. So we started out, this is just almost just a piece of blocking, this 3/4 piece here, which you see right here. That gives me something for my tile to go back against. And then this is a piece of the baseboard detail that miters around it. Then I've got, here's the baseboard right here that you can see. And then this is this big, molding, which they call crown. And then I've just got a back band, just basically a square piece for a back band. What I did when I got ready to build this, I put a full sheet of MDF up on a workbench so I could kind of lay out all the parts. If you've not done one of these before, it can even be a good idea to take a pencil, get a nice clean sheet of MDF, and just draw it out first. Draw the lines out so you can see how it's going to go, almost like making a template. There's one part of this that's kind of tricky that I want to show you how that goes together. Again, it's basically how do we create this offset for this crosseted corner. Now, this isn't the exact same baseboard, but my best piece of scrap I found in the shop. But so I might cut a miter and then clip the corner, which that's what's going on right here, okay? Then I made this cut. Now, the only way that I could think of to make this cut is I took my slide miter saw and I extended it way, way out, dropped it down, and cut back to this point right here. And then I took it to a table saw and cut over, and then because there was a little bit, left in that corner, I just took a multi-tool and cut that out. But the way that goes together, then you have, of course, this isn't as wide because that piece is wider. I had more height, but that's what allows this to come over and give me this area right here for that crossed corner. Once you get past that, then basically this is just a piece, probably about a 6-inch piece that's turned vertically. Again, the back band on this provides what you build off of to build the mantel shelf. This is just a large cove mold that sits on top of it. I had some blocking back behind it. And then just, again, a very simple mantel shelf. Now, I do want to tell you that there are times you see a lot of mantel details where, things pop out. Like this might miter out further and back in. Those look really, really good, but you have to remember this is just 3 pieces of crown mold. If I pop this out here and I pop it out over here, now I've got, let's see, that's 3, 6. It goes from 3 pieces to 7 pieces. And you'll even see some that have a pop out in the middle. So just remember, if you want to do those, they look great. Just remember it does take a lot more labor, and you're also going to be cutting some really small pieces of crown mold in here. So this is a good look. It's simpler. I've certainly done plenty of them where these things popped out. But if you are going to do one where it pops out, just remember a lot more labor involved, and plan and price accordingly. Okay. This I wanted to show you is just a mock-up of this, how I built this. Again, you look at that, well, there's a lot going on there, but once you see how the pieces come together, it's relatively simple. Here I just have a flat piece that was big enough to sit over the top of my pilasters, and I just barely rounded over the edges on it. This is a 7 1/4 piece of material. All that you see of it when it's done is this right here, and it miters back. This detail that you see right here is actually a piece of 1-inch thick baseboard, and I ripped it down to the size that I wanted. By the way, when you're doing something like this, it can be a good idea, especially if you're just starting, to make a mock-up like this so you can see how the proportions go. And anytime you're doing a mock-up, you always want to turn the outside corner so you can see the beauty of the molding. So I've done a bunch of these, and often I don't. do a mock-up like this, but especially if you're just getting started, a great idea to do a mock-up. And by the way, anytime you do a mock-up, it's always good to have it primed because you can really see more what it looks like when you get those shadow lines. Of course, if it's going to be stain grade, you have to kind of work around that. But here's the piece of baseboard. Then this is somewhat of it's got a cove cut, but I guess you call it a crown mold. And then I've just got, again, that 1 inch thick shelf that sits on top. So again, it looks a little bit complicated until you see how it breaks down, see how all those pieces come together. Now, we probably do more panel pilasters than anything, and panel sections up here. And it's really pretty straightforward. This is just a little mock-up I did. It's just a frame that's been pocket screwed together. These jam extensions were pocket screwed on. This would be a great example. If this is going to have brick inside there for the non-combustible, these would obviously need to be a lot thicker. And that would also affect how much this mantel shelf, projected out. But so I pocket screwed the frame together. Then I pocket screwed these extensions. Now, a lot of times when I'm doing that, and of course you're gonna make sure you got glue in there, I'll put a few headless pins to kind of hold it in place. And you see on this side, I don't try to get it flush to start with. I'll generally let that hang out about 1/16 of an inch, because to get it to line up just right, especially when you're putting pocket screws in, hardly ever works. So I'm just gonna real quickly show what I do when I've got this hanging over. I'll just take a flush trim router bit. That's a router bit with a bearing on the bottom side. It's as big as the cutter. And I'm actually going to stop just right up at the top. I don't know if you'll be able to see it or not, but maybe you can see how that bearing's right in here. It's flush trimming it. This is where I stop, right here. I can't see that joint right now. You always want to make sure you have a good bit of glue in there, and maybe even a little bit of glue popping out. Now, you don't want to route it while the glue is still there and wet, because it'll get around your bearing. Then your bearing will be doing this and you won't get that smooth cut. So let the glue dry, scrape it off, then flush trim. All I have to do here is do a little bit of sanding. But on anything like this, what you want to do is sand it, then close your eyes, run your hand over it, and if you can't feel it, then you know you got the joint you want. But I always sand it until I can't feel the joint. Then I know I've got really pretty much the perfect joint. And then again, I would put, this I used some plywood because it was very narrow. But when you get something wider than this, I put a full piece, of 1x material behind it. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is how to mount this. One like this that's got the pilaster, we would just take a scrap of wood like this, put it on the wall. That's a piece that would fit in between here, and then the pilaster goes against it, and then we just nail back through into it. I do always make this maybe an 1/8 inch narrower than the inside dimension of that, but that's a great way to mount something like this. Now, you can also design into, and this is also a good idea, in the back of this, a place for a cleat. If you look at this, I could fit a cleat to the back wall right there and then nail it down. Could do the same thing here, and that would give me something to mount this to. It's a good idea. When you're installing one of these, always make sure that you put level on the floor, and whichever side is the highest side, set that side first, then shim this up, and hopefully it won't be very much, but boy, you always want to make sure that mantel shelf is perfectly level when you install it. So just find out what the high side is, set it first, and then raise it up. Now, one like this, not a lot of opportunities to do what I showed on the other day, but you can have a cleat up here still, and then this is a trim head screw. It's a small screw, and a lot of times we'll use something like that screw either to toenail in down through here, maybe even toenail down into the floor if we've got something I can run a screw into. But I want to have something more than a nail to hold this in place, so I can maybe have a cleat up here and then use a few screws back in there. So to just kind of go back and summarize, first of all, you want to make sure that you understand what the rules are for clearance to combustible surfaces. And that has a lot to do with whether you've got a wood burning or a gas burning fireplace. Find out your client's expectations on mantle height, what's going above it. Find out whether they've got a mantle plug or not, and how much projection they want on their mantle shelf. Remember that if they bring an inspiration picture, no matter what that picture looks like, you've got to build something that protects you from liability, so that you have the right amounts of setback. Then determine how much horizontal space, get you a story pole, do a layout on the story pole, determine how much horizontal space that you need on the wall, and then do you a vertical layout on a story pole also. If you're just getting started building mantles, you may even want to, on a piece of plywood or OSB would be better. You may literally want to draw out all the parts so that you have like a template to work off of, especially if you're doing a mantle like this. But the thing that I really encourage you, I've literally built a good bit of my reputation as a trim carpenter and contractor around doing really nice mantles. It's probably the most important piece of millwork in the house because it's the center of attention. And so really put a lot of extra effort into it, and you can build your reputation. Again, I want to say thank you to the folks from Windsor One who provide these amazing products and also financially help to make this possible. And if you do have any questions, if you're watching this, there is going to be a question and answer session. So perhaps I'll get to talk to some of you there. Thank you for your time.
Just made it on. This thing has been flashing for the last couple minutes.
What's the time? Did you shut this off? What was
Like
the time?
28 minutes.
Okay, it's plenty good. Did you stop this one? This is 27.